year. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Lena, and thank you for inviting me to talk about the Deichman Library here with you this afternoon. It's always a bit weird to give this kind of lectures on Zoom, but I'll do my best. I have a presentation with some video clips and also some sound included, so let's hope everything runs smoothly. If not, please interrupt me, Lena, and tell me if not. I'll start talking shortly about Oslo Public Library, the library I'm running. Oslo is a city with now around 700,000 inhabitants. If we count the surroundings, we talk about approximately 1 million people that is kind of using our library network here in Oslo. The library network consists of one public main library, which is where I am now, the new Bjørvika library. And then we have 18 public branch libraries, and we have 2 federal prison libraries and 1 federal hospital library. This is in total the network we are running. We are 370 employees, and the library network is 100% founded by the city of Oslo, except the federal prison libraries and the hospital libraries that also have federal libraries. The annual budget of our organization is 43 million euros. And we expect this year, after the pandemic, approximately 4.5 million visitors in our library network. We distribute approximately 1.6 million books in different formats, and we produce around 7,000 events, spanning from literature festivals to programs for school children and kindergarten. So it's a quite broad spectrum of services. Shortly, by distribution of visits, Deichman is by far the biggest cultural institution in Norway now. And approximately 55% of the population in Oslo is now using the public library on a kind of regular basis, which is quite high compared to earlier. We are also the oldest cultural institution in Norway, and coming back to that, we are founded in 1785, so we turn 236 years this year, and is that the oldest cultural institution in Norway with a very long story. I'll get back to that as well. Okay, then I will try to continue the presentation here. Yeah, then the image shifted. Okay, so in this lecture, I'm going to talk about, where I asked the rhetorical question, do we still need a public library? Of course we do that, but I'm rather repeating here the frequent question asked by people that are ignorant of the task of a public library. Most of these people, the image of the library is foremost, like this, a dusty building with old librarians and huge collections of old books, silent reading rooms, and microfilm projectors where you can search in old newspapers. This is a very common way of viewing the public library, and certainly among the people that don't use the library. And I think this is a dangerous conception and view of the library, because it is absolutely not true. Very few public libraries around in Europe now look like this anymore. So the public library sector has evolved enormously during the last decade. And more important, the public libraries have been the main gateway, I think, for children and young people to enter the realm of literature, storytelling, and perspective. And this is nothing new. If you discover literature, knowledge, and science early in life, the chance that you live a better life, take better decisions, get inspired, and become a better citizen in your community is higher. So public libraries have always been the bedrock and core institution in all prospering society based on a humanistic perspective. This is why law in most countries in the world regulate public libraries. I'm sure you have in Switzerland as well a library act or a library law regulating the obligation of each municipality to have their public library. The legislation of public library is in many countries also related to the constitution and seen as part of the democratic infrastructure. The main problem, however, for all library directors around the world is this one. This is not a public library. This is a cell phone. Public libraries have since antiquity primarily been social spaces. The public library consists of a collection of books stored in the building and a lot of space for dialogue, debate, interactions, learning, sharing, and talking about the past and foremost about the future of your community. You may find channels and ways of communicating via your cell phone. That's true. However, the chance that you meet someone disagreeing with you, challenging your perspective, or inspiring you is quite minor. Probably an algorithm directs you into a digital bubble, an echo chamber that confirms your opinions and perspectives. It is, in my opinion, extremely naive to believe that this cell phone can replace one of our civilization's core institutions, the public library, as a physical space for authentic meetings between living human beings. 3 Scandinavian cities have, on this ground, decided to redefine and modernize the public library as a social and democratic space. And these 3 cities are, as you will know, Aarhus in Denmark, Helsinki in Finland, and Oslo in Norway. And we have been cooperating for the last 2 decades about developing libraries. So when you go to these 3 libraries, you will see 3 very distinct libraries with different solutions, but the core idea of the modern library, of these libraries, is the same and is a shared concept that we have developed together. And this is then the result. This is Dock 1 in Aarhus, Denmark's 2nd largest city. It is a beautiful library that opened in 2015. And it's drawn by Smith Hammer Lassen and Christine Jensen architects, Danish architects, both of them. It's located on the waterfront, and since it opened, has attracted enormous quantities of visitors and also gained several rewards, and is now, I think, one of the most important public libraries in the world, with its festival that takes place, or conference that takes place every 2nd year, the next library conference, where people come from not only Scandinavia, but all around the globe to participate and develop the ideas of public library. So the second project is the Audi library that opened in 2018, drawn by the Ala architects, Finnish architect, and is part of the Helsinki Public Library Network. Also a wonderful new library, a tremendous space, and almost 30% of the building is reserved for technology, makerspaces, and learning facilities that you also find in the Oslo Library and the Aarhus Library, but this is particular for this library in Helsinki. And then finally, our new library here in Oslo, Deichman Bjørvika, that opened in June 2020. It's drawn by the Norwegian architects Lund Hagem and Atelier Oslo, and the interiors by the Scenario Interior Architects. I will use a lot of the rest of the lecture here to talk about this project, but I can start mentioning that actually it took 12 years to plan and construct the building. It's very important to know that when you do new main library, a central library, we are not talking about the traditional building project process. We talk about innovation, and that innovation will have to take place between the library staff and the management of the library and the architects and all the technical advisors, the ICT advisors, the interior architects, etc. So it's a very long process if you are going to actually end up with something that fits with the needs of the public. The city of Oslo, that is 100% founding the public library system I mentioned, and also the investment in this library is done by the city of Oslo. They basically realized 2 important things. The first was that the old building, the old library that is actually still existing but not used as a library anymore, it was finished in 1933. It was based on a very old concept of the library, like the image I showed you earlier. A very traditional book storing facility without any space for human interaction. So the city government, they understood finally that we can't develop the old building. It's not space really for people, it's only for storing books. 70% of the space for storing books and 30% for people. So that was the first point of departure for organizing and developing this new library. And then the second part was that the old library was located in the administration district of the government buildings, not far from where we had the tragic explosion, the terrorist attack here in Oslo 10 years ago. And basically the whole area is not anymore an important space in Oslo for where people pass. So very few people would go there if they don't have the specific idea of going to the library. While this new location that you can see on this image is actually close to the central station that you can see behind the library. We have also the most important connection of the tramways between east and west and the buses and the subway. So approximately 50 million people are in transit in this area on a yearly basis. It's the prime location for a library. And when we look at the branch libraries as well, we always locate them, if possible, close to a subway station. A public library must close to where people are actually trafficking and moving when they go to work, to school, or come back to home. So with these 2 points of departures, it was easy to develop this project because of the local city government. They understood that we have to organize the library building in a different way, and we have to put it on a new spot where people actually pass by. The library is, like I mentioned, designed by Lundhagen at Oslo. It's 23,000 square meters gross space, and then 13,600 net functional area. 10,000 square meters for the public. So it's basically 90% of the building is open to the public, and then we have very few spaces that are close to the public and for internal purposes. So we have basically no closed stack. All the books we have, they are open and out in the public space. It's 5 floors above the ground, and then we have a basement with the facilities, and then the capacity for visitors is approximately 2,000 simultaneous visits. In the old library, it was basically full, and we had no more seats when we had some 300-400 people in house. In this new library, we have 1,100 seats, and also different meeting rooms, conference facilities, and halls and cinemas, etc. in addition. The library opens at 8 every morning on weekdays, and closes at 10. On Saturday and Sunday, it's also open, and it opens at 10 and closes at 6. And it's basically open 365 days a year. We have a couple of days we close, but that's all. Okay, let's continue. I didn't mention that our library is the oldest cultural institution in Norway, founded in 1785 during the Age of Enlightenment. Carl Deichman, you can see him here on the picture, the founder of the library. He was a typical man of his century. He spoke 6 languages and had a great belief in science, facts, and the good in man, I would say. In his will, he donated 6,000 volume book collection to the city of Oslo. At the moment, at the end of the 18th century, Oslo was called Christiania. It was part of the Norwegian Danish kingdom, so the city had a different name. The condition in his will was that the public library should open, accessible to everyone, free of charge. In addition to being a man of the Enlightenment, today we would call Carl Deichman a founder and entrepreneur. He was basically interested in the future. And I think that is also a great misunderstanding when we talk about libraries. We always tend to look at them as collective memory, which is of course true, but what takes place in a library, a public library, is basically about the future, creating a better future. The Enlightenment included a range of ideas centered on the value of human happiness, the pursuit of knowledge obtained by means of reason, and the evidence of the senses, and ideals such as liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and the state. All these values are kind of still the core of a modern public library. So I think we could say that the modern public library in most countries is actually rooted in the Age of Enlightenment and at core of all our strategy. So the way we actually develop the library rooms may differ. This picture is from 1890. It is the central reading room in the then Central Library in Oslo. It seems maybe like a very old library by the picture's quality, but this is a very modern library room. What you see in this picture is basically a social space where people sit together, reading, maybe talking a bit, and the collection is basically placed along the walls. And this principle of organizing a library is very efficient when it comes to creating a social space. It's not very efficient when it comes to creating a very ideal way of organizing the collection, because there will always be a door interrupting the shelving. There will be other issues that makes it difficult to continue the album. So here in the new main library, we have basically used the same idea as in this picture. We started to plan the social spaces, and then where we had space left, we did put the collection. So what is strange, at the end of the 19th century, we had a development in the public libraries in Oslo that were extremely progressive, and they were very concerned to create social spaces for people. At this moment, people had time to read. All the population could read, and they had, mostly importantly, they had spare time. And when people have spare time, of course, then they can go to the library. And this was something quite new at the end of the 19th century. And therefore, these social spaces were extremely important. But what happens then at the turn of the century and in the 20th century, this kind of rooms disappear here in Oslo. We start to build libraries with big book collection, which is of course nice and important, but no social spaces. So people came to the library, they borrowed the book and went home and read it and came back and delivered it. So it seems that in some way, society or our industry forgot the social space, and they didn't really continue this fabulous tradition here in Oslo, at least from the end of the 19th century, of creating these spaces. A good example of this is the youth department. Here you can see quite extreme way of organizing a library. This is from the turn of the century, 1900 approximately. You see the librarian behind the desk with a kind of it's like a prison, protecting the books from the patrons. And this way of looking at the patrons says a lot about the balance of power, so to speak, between the employee, the librarian, and the patrons standing outside, knocking on the door and asking if they can borrow a book. And I think to some extent we could say that after 1900, in most European countries, we had legislation for libraries. We had different kind of government organizations that would tell all the libraries how to organize it, and it was extremely focused on the collection and how to organize the collection and the distribution of the collection. And the legislation, at least in Norway, and the way we developed the regulation for libraries, did tend to forget about the social space. So let's jump forward 131 years to the branch library we have in the central borough of Tøyen in Oslo. This is from this library, and it's a photo shot taken in January 2020, just before the pandemic hit. Deichman Bjørvika is one of our smallest but most popular branch libraries in Oslo. And at this moment, this photo is taken around 9 o'clock in the night. And but then the library is staffless. There are no employees in the libraries. So the patrons, the users, they can open the door to the library with their library card and the code. And they use the library as they please. This is a social room. On the 800 square meters in this library, we have 300,000 visits yearly. At least we had the last year before the pandemic hit. And 25% of the visits come in staffless time. So here you can see that we have turned back to, or recognized again, the old library. There are a lot of similarities between these two rooms, though 131 years separate them. Okay, so let me come to my point. What is the main problem, I think, in many different kind of sectors, as well in the library sector, is that we tend to talk about what kind of services we are dealing with. We talk about how we proceed and how we present our services, but we very seldom talk about why we are here. And I think Simon Sinek, that you will know certainly from other projects you have heard about, he has been extremely important for us to really insisting on always starting with the why. And I think the public library is basically, like I said, it's a bedrock democratic and cultural institution. Public libraries train the future reader, guarantee us that all of us have access to the best of culture and facts, all for free. That's important. Public libraries produce more equality, more integration, more crossover meetings between people with different backgrounds, religion, sexuality, political opinion, etc. And in addition, of course, public libraries create more joy of reading, more joy of life. Public libraries are, in my opinion, machines for letting dreams come true, getting inspired, for meeting people you would never meet any other place, for using your voice, telling your story, and listen to others. Shortly, public libraries are machines for creating a better and more sustainable future and for having fun. That is why we build public libraries, not for storing old books. The main problem, like I said, is that we all tend to focus on the collection. And certainly, when we start building new libraries, we tend to focus on the collection. And what happens then is, when you sit down with the architect, they will immediately ask you, how many books do you have? Because books are heavy, and they need to organize the building in a way that makes it possible to store huge quantities they would imagine of books, old books. So then it's very important that you have started asking yourself, why are we actually here? Is this a social space, or is this a book storing facility? My experience is that it's often easier to ask people from outside the library sector what the library is. And I will now show you a prologue, a short film clip, with two Norwegian artists, Lars Saabye Christensen, he's one of the most successful Norwegian authors, and Kamara Jof, which is also an author and also working with theater. They produced this prologue to the opening of the new main library 2 years ago, and it's translated, it's in Norwegian, but it's translated in English, so I hope you can read the subtitles.
Biblioteker nye for noen. Velkommen. Dette ditt.
Biblioteket en himmel, hver stjerne en bok. Biblioteket et hav, hver bok en bølge.
Jeg har vært her før. Det var her inne jeg fant et språk som var begynnelsen på mitt eget. Det var her jeg leste om de som sto opp for meg før jeg fantes.
Biblioteket en skog, hver leser et tre, som låner lys, som låner regn. Biblioteket et sirkus.
Det var her stemmen min starta. Jeg har aldri blitt hysja på her.
Biblioteket tid. Biblioteket en vei. Biblioteket deg. Biblioteket deg. Det du som åpner I dag.
Okay, so if we are going to explain very shortly what this is about, if you look at the left-hand side, you have a very traditional. If you can please unmute your microphone, it's easier. On the left-hand side, you have very traditional programming of the library. You have the books, rack and stack on the left hand, and then you have some spaces for the public. This is how the old library here in Oslo was organized. Like I mentioned, it's wonderful for librarians because it's very, very easy to find the books, to organize the books, and to make it all well organized with a very tight system. But it's not so interesting for the patrons, for the users, because they have to really be extremely motivated to find those books, or they have to talk with a librarian that can tell them where to find it. In the new programming on the right-hand side, you basically see a schematic way of what we have been doing here in the new library. We start with, like I mentioned, the social spaces, indicated here by all the colors, and then we organize the books in a way that they are connected to the social spaces, but they are not really telling us that the organization of the book is not important. We have digital tools to wayfinding and find the books. It's not ideal, but what happens is that the user, the patrons, and the books, they are at least in the same space. So what happens then is that the patrons and the users, they get stimulated, they get curious, and we see a bigger circulation in the collection, actually. What happens as well is that bookshelves are excellent for creating subdivision in the space. So if you put in bookshelves like this, then you can divide a very big space into smaller spaces and put furniture and different activities in between the shelves. And then you suddenly have a completely new way of organizing the library. So we primarily seek to make a room for people and not for books. We create public spaces that are somewhere in between the home, a little relaxed and cozy, or the work at school, which is more formal. So it's in between home and work or school. And this is often referred to as a third place. It's not home, not work, but the third place. And this has shown itself as a big success because people feel more at home, literally speaking, and they tend to stay in the library for much more time than in a traditional library. By doing this, we also give up power and position by creating good digital self-service solutions. So we are not anymore kind of the owners of the room. We are facilitators, hosts, helping you, and you yourself actually define what kind of use you will make of the room. So we create a space for experiences and learning where the books and lending of books are only a part of the offer and not anymore the core. I'll show you now a short movie clip from one of our branch libraries where you can see this more elaborated. This is a branch library at Stovner, which is it's located in a shopping mall in one of the suburbs in Oslo. And we usually talk quite a lot before we make a new library with the local users and try to understand what kind of needs they have in the library. And in this particular case, we know that people living at Stovner, they seldom go to the library alone. They go together. So this is a kind of a social library where you are together. And this has implications of how you furnish the library and how much space you use for different activities. So I think this is a very good example of this third place. You can see that it's kind of picking up elements from what you would have at home, but still it's not private. It's still public space. So this living room, this new living room, or this third place, it creates a completely different atmosphere in the library. And like I said, people tend to stay for more time. Another feature with public libraries, which is very interesting, is that it's a place where it's socially acceptable to go alone. You don't need to be together with someone, but you can actually go there and it's not stigmatizing to be alone in the library. Actually, most people do that. And what happened then is that you have a kind of a contact that is very kind of low intensity between the different users of the library, but by that you have a very special space where people that would not normally meet in other public spaces, they have some kind of interaction and contact in the library. And we try to investigate and see how we can strengthen that relation and build bridges, so to speak, between people. In these new libraries, we also have a lot of different facilities for performances. And then it's important to say that the performances are not necessarily by professionals. It could be by the users themselves. We have a lot of volunteers working in the library. This is from the central hall here in the main library in Bjørvika, the new library, where we can have different kind of activities, cultural activities for the users. And then I think it's also important to say that the public library is a space for different activities that is also not necessarily connected to reading. This is from the makerspace here in Bjørvika. It's a space where we have a lot of digital tools. We have 3D printers, laser cutters, plotters, and like you see here, sewing machines. And then you may ask, why do you have sewing machines in a public library? It's a good question. I think it has to do with the possibility of coming to the library using tools that you not necessarily have at home. For example, you know that the digital competence in Oslo among children, for example, is very uneven. In the eastern part of the city, children have less digital competence than in the western part of the city. We can do something about that. So all the digital tools in this in the libraries, they are there to increase digital competence. Sewing machines is maybe not in itself so important, but what happens around that table is quite important. People come here, they can use the equipment. You don't need to buy a sewing machine at home that you use once a year. I think it's sustainable in a way to have these kind of tools in the library. And you come here, you can repair your clothes. You're taking part in not throwing away, or libraries is basically sharing economy from the point of departure. So here we share tools, we can share knowledge, how to use them, and it's a social space again. So these machines, they are used all the time, each day. It's very popular. And I think people meet a lot of friends here. And then I am happy because they are still in the library and they grab a book on their way out. Another thing is that we have a lot of tools for working with digital content. We have podcast studios where you can produce your own podcasts, sharing your opinion, use your voice. Again, it's about democratic infrastructure to be able to have access to this and know how to work with the tools. So during the last years, I think I would say that our staff, they have been through an extraordinary transformation. Most of them are librarians. They still can and should use all their competence in that field because it's extremely important for many patrons and users. But they are also becoming wonderful hosts, facilitators, producers, and working in many new ways. That, to some extent, I think has been challenging, but as well rewarding. Like you see here, where Mats is reading from a book in one of our branch libraries.
Welcome.
Okay, now I'm going to show you another movie clip, and this is my colleague, the head of the main library, Merete, that will show you the main library here in Oslo.
Welcome to Oslo and the new main library here in Bjørvika, close by the ocean and next neighbor to the Opera House and the Munch Museum. We have a wonderful building, 6 floors filled with books, magazines, film, music, and wonderful places where you can read, share, laugh, and meet other people. Here you can find all kinds of tools to enrich your life and to participate in the society. I will show you some of the more playful areas in the library, and a wonderful place to start is on the 3rd floor with the makerspaces.
Hi! Welcome to the Makerspace here in Bjørvika. My name is Asle and I work here at the Makerspace. Here we have a lot of fun activities. Hey, come on, let's go and see. Here in Bjørvika you can make your own 3D models. We have equipment for that here. Or you want to sew your own clothes. We have a lot of sewing machines. When you've done your 3D modeling, you can come here and use all of our 3D printers. Or if you want to make some artwork on your new sewn clothes, we have equipment for that.
Let's move on to the music apartment. You will find a lot more than the books and the notes you expect to find there.
Hey there! Welcome to the music department here in Bjørvika. Like the Makerspace, you can do a lot of fun activities here too. You can learn how to play bass, guitar or drums. And if you want to record your own podcast, come on. You can do that here at our brand new sound studio.
In the children's department, we have created a small world for kids and families. And I do believe we have about everything, almost everything, to make learning and reading fun and playful.
The children's department here in Bjørvika, here you can play games on big and small screens. In the auditorium, you can listen to soundbooks. The department is full of literature for children. And it's even fun for grown-ups.
On all the floors in the library, we have smaller or larger spaces created for art exhibitions. We have had about 20 exhibitions since we opened, but one art project is not yet opened to the public, but I'm eager to show it to you. This is the Future Library project, created by Scottish Katie Patterson, made of wood from a small forest outside Oslo. In this small clearing, there is a forest growing. About 1,000 trees are planted. They will grow for 100 years and will supply paper for an anthology made in 100 years. Each year, an author is invited to contribute to the project with a manuscript. The manuscript will be kept in one of these beautiful boxes in the room. It will neither be read nor published until the 100 years have passed. And this project raises some fundamental questions about who we are, where we are heading, and what kind of future we deliver our next generation. It's a wonderful project and we are eager to show it to the rest of the world. So by this, I would like to welcome you all to Deichman Bjørvika next time you're in Oslo. It's a wonderful library waiting for you here.
Okay, so then I will soon wrap up, and I will do that by telling you about our new plan, our strategy for the next 4 years that we actually finalized now during the pandemic. I will do that quite rapidly because I see we are running out of time. When we made our new strategy, we kind of started with looking at Oslo, the city of Oslo, and what is the situation for people living in Oslo now. And basically, it's not special for Oslo, but I think it's quite special. It's quite typical for many big cities. One of the features, I think, and one of the most important facts about Oslo now is that 50% of the households in this city is one-person households. So quite a lot of Oslo people live alone. They need public spaces that are free and non-commercial, so to speak, and where they can find both literature, acts, culture, and meet other people. So I think the statistics and the development of the city emphasizes and even strengthen our old strategy of creating these social spaces. But also we think that we should work more thoroughly on bridging the gap between people, because people in Oslo, we have kind of 30 different nationalities in Oslo, and the gap between them and the communication between different groups in the city, it's quite weak sometimes. And we can use the library and the activity in the library to bridging that gap and make people and neighbors know each other in a better way and understand that it's really not so much separating us. We have more similarities than differences when it comes to it all. So this is something that will be important. And to achieve that, we need to realize that the library organization must reflect the city. So we have also decided during the last year, actually, but we are strengthening that as well now, that we need to hire, when we hire people, we need also to be aware of cultural competence, language skills, and all other typical skills that is important for our patrons and users that we have in-house. Only in that way we can actually understand the user and the needs in the city. Another thing that I think is very important for all public libraries to understand now is that we are just exiting the COVID crisis, which was quite dramatical, and many libraries stayed open actually during the pandemic in Europe. We did in Oslo as well, as the only cultural institution in Oslo. It was actually during the heaviest periods during the pandemic. It was the pharmacies, the food shops, the public transportation, and the public libraries that were open. That was all. So I think that we have to understand that in times of crisis, now we have the situation in Ukraine, but an even bigger problem is the climate change and how society and communities are going to cope with a very different way of living probably in the years to come. We have to change our habits. We have to think new on how to use the resources. And again, the library can play a very important role, both with facts available for people, but also creating debates and dialogue and discussions in the library, in social space, and also motivate certainly young people to participate, become active in their community, and feel that they can involve themselves and work with changes. Another tendency we know in Western democracies is that since 1930s, the percentage of people who says it's essential to live in a democracy has decreased year after year. And I think this is a huge problem for all Western democracies now, is to understand that young people, we need to kind of train them, and certainly old people as well, train them how to disagree in a civilized way. And in social media, in the social bubbles and echo chambers, it's a quite hard climate for debate. And I think many young people, they are afraid of that. So again, using the library, the social space to start dialogue, start discussions, and train again, certainly young people in how to disagree. That's okay to disagree, and we can do that in a civilized way. So here in Oslo, we have also kind of recognized that as an important way also of cooperating. We cooperate with the national broadcast companies. We have two in Norway, TV2 and the national broadcast NRK. And we have very similar goals when it comes to public service. And this, for example, is from the party leader debate last autumn before the election that were held in the library. And I think that goes very well with our objectives. So I will wrap up, and I do ask this question again: do we still need public libraries? And the answer is, of course, yes. Thank you for your attention.